This is Talkish. I am Halli Casser-Jayne. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is always available online at hallicasserjayne.com. On episode 315, my guest is writer, longtime activist, a CNN political commentator, and the host of the State of Resistance podcast, here to talk about her new book, The Opposite of Hate, A Field Guide to Repairing Our Humanity, Sally Kohn. And as always, stick around for my commentary at the end of the show. We've got a lot to get to, so let's get to it. In researching her book, The Opposite of Hate, A Field Guide to Repairing Our Humanity, Sally Kohn, one of the leading progressive voices in America today, writer, activist, CNN political commentator, and the host of the State of Resistance podcast, talked to leading scientists and researchers and investigated the evolutionary and cultural roots of hate in its most subtle and obvious forms, from implicit bias and racism to violence and full-blown genocide. She traveled across the country and worldwide, interviewing fascinating people who have left extraordinary lives of hate behind, including a former neo-Nazi who began to change his life when a cashier at McDonald's, upon seeing his swastika tattoo, told him, "You're a better person than that. I know that's not who you are." He's now a Buddhist. She spoke with a former Palestinian terrorist who, after a prison sentence and even after his daughter was killed by the Israeli military, now works with Israelis to forge understanding and peace. And she spoke with survivors of the Rwandan genocide, including an unbelievable story of a man who fell in love with and married the daughter of the man who had slaughtered his entire family. She even spoke with some of her most vicious Twitter trolls, some of whom expressed regret or opened up about their personal hardships and demonstrated their own humanity to Kohn. We'll ask Sally about that in a minute. Sally knows of what she writes. As she says, she's a woman and a lesbian and a Jew. Oh, and she works for CNN. I'll ask her about all of that and more. Let's talk with the author of a compelling new book, The Opposite of Hate, A Field Guide to Repairing Our Humanity, Miss Sally Kohn.
Hello.
Halli Sally, here we go.
Hey, we rhyme. How great.
How are you, kiddo? Thanks for being here. So appreciate your being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's my pleasure. Let me begin with this, Sally. The Opposite of Hate should be required reading for everyone. Do you hear me? It should be in every library, every bookstore, every school. This is good stuff. And let's talk about
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hate, in my opinion, ground zero for the mess this country's in. And, Rodgers and Hammerstein, I was thinking about this, the great Broadway duo, you and I remember, we're of a certain age, but spoke to bigotry in their iconic South Pacific. Here we are. Still hate, right? It doesn't seem to go away.
Yeah.
And if you were to find the causes of hate, bigotry would be on the list, and what else? How do you see this hate thing? What is this?
Oh, I think, it's complicated, right? So a lot of people would say, and I've had people come up to me and say, like, oh, well, we're born to hate. We inherently hate as part of who we are as human beings, and that's actually only half true. The fact is, we are to an extent hardwired to hate. We've developed the capacity to break the world around us into in-groups and out-groups, and to have a bias for, quote-unquote, our own, and a fear or even an antagonism or hate toward the others. But who we hate, that we have decided to hate in certain ways, certain groups of people over time, over history, that's actually very much something that is learned. That's a product of our history and past and our habits in the present, and who we have been taught to hate and how we've been taught to hate. And that really is an extension, I think, largely of that history that we have inadequately addressed over time.
I grew up in a privileged white heterosexual but Jewish family world. And I know about hate and bigotry growing up when anti-Semitism was front and center. You grew up in a small town in PA. What was your personal experience with hate? I know you admit that you were the bullier. Fascinating. I saw that TED Talk. Oh, my God. Everybody should go to YouTube and watch that. But give us some of that now.
Well, actually, I'd like to just point out I grew up in the fourth largest city in Pennsylvania. So while it may be a small town by some standards, it was, in fact, I grew up in Allentown, fourth largest city. Just want to say that. And it sounds like we might have had very similar upbringings. I grew up white, upper middle class. One of the things my parents did, for which I'm grateful, is that they helped me understand class and income inequality from a young age. And so I knew that I was privileged, that I had more than others, and understood what that meant, that it wasn't an extension of people's, or wasn't a reflection of people's worth, but rather of the inequalities and injustices in our society. Also grew up Jewish, although did not experience a lot of anti-Semitism or discrimination because of that as a child. But did, yes, when I was a kid, I was a bully. I mean, there's no other way around it. I was mean to other kids, often kids who were kids with disabilities, kids who were poor, kids who ended up who were gender nonconforming in some way. And when I was older, in high school, when I came out, and my family was actually great, but my then girlfriend's family was not. It was the first time I had ever really experienced hate and discrimination on that side, and it left a lasting impact on me to the point where for the rest of my life I wanted to fight against hate and inequality and injustice.
It's interesting, though, because I can relate to that. There was a girl in school that I gave a hard time to as well, for which I often think about. I owe an apology. It's curious to me, though, what was going on inside of me at the time. And I think if we can get to that, we have a clue as to where hate emanates or generates within us. Because in my case, anyway, maybe you can relate, it wasn't so much about what I felt about her so much as what I didn't like about myself.
Yeah, I think that's to some extent true, and that there is a way in which, I didn't get, in the book I started to get at the sort of interpersonal and sort of individual psychological issues, but, that sort of gets us a bit more into self-help territory than this book. But what is true is that there's some way in which when we psychologically engage in the practice of otherizing, discriminating, hating others, we're partly doing it in ways to insulate ourselves in some false perception that, for instance, just one example, there's a psychological phenomenon that we tend to treat bad things we do as episodic, situational, contextual. Like it was a mistake, or it had a reason, or it was, I did it in defense of this, or, response to that, or whatever. But when other people do it, it's who they are. They're bad people. And that paradigm, in a way, reinforces our own sense of goodness, because we then see the other as the bad. And we tend to then do this, we extrapolate this out for groups as well. That phenomenon of sort of engaging in self-protection perversely by attacking others is certainly a piece of the kind of individual psychological narrative in hate. I happen to be more interested with the societal pieces of how we, as a group, as communities, as states, as countries, as a world, tend to put people into boxes of good, bad, us, them, and turn that into policy, culture, politics, media, etc.
I won't argue with you on that, but I will say this, that I think even in your research, you have to take your personal and understand that it's going to have some influence on how you perceive what you come across as you're taking in the information that you're going to spit out into the book. So I think it's important to take a look, in your case, particularly on how, it colors your perception, so to speak. The one thing I want to get to, because I think this is hilarious, I know this would be a question my listeners want to hear. You were a liberal who worked at Fox News. In the context of this conversation, what did you learn from that experience of working in the world of the other, communicating with the other? You're not there anymore. Talk to me.
No, I'm at CNN now, but yes, I spent 2.5 years as a lefty at Fox News, and in a lot of ways that was the experience that fueled this whole journey for me, because I went there thinking, honestly, and I'm I'm not proud of it, but I probably was thinking what a lot of my fellow lefties would, which is that these people who, on-air and off-air, viewers, the famous people, the not famous people, that they are hateful, not just that the things they believe and the policies they support are hateful, but that I expected that they would be, as individuals, 100% totalistically, completely just hateful people. They would be mean and nasty and personally mean and nasty to me. And so what happened when I went to go work at Fox was two things that surprised me. The first was they were not what I expected. I mean, yes, they believed things, said things that I often found were hateful, still think are hateful, but they also, were sometimes nice to me, were sometimes kind. Sometimes we could find areas where we agreed, even on policies and positions. And either way, they were often kind to me, kind about my family, caring, compassionate. At least that, whether it should have or shouldn't have, it startled the heck out of me. And then the second thing that happened was I realized, oh, wait a second, I hate them. That I have these stereotypes and these ideas, these preconceived notions, and I've kind of generalized them. And that led me to want to understand hate more as a phenomenon, why we do it, and how we can stop it.
Fascinating. Again, puts things in perspective. The title of your book is tough. But I want to talk to you about this opposite of hate. You know, the old saying, the opposite of hate isn't love, it's indifference. What is the opposite of hate, in your opinion?
Oh, I actually don't think it is love. You don't have to love someone to stop hating them. You don't have to like them to stop hating them. What you have to do is understand how, in spite of our differences and our disagreements, which I happen to think are important, part of what make us great as people, and certainly as a country, as a world, in spite of those differences and disagreements, you have to also understand how we are fundamentally connected as people. The opposite of hate is connection, understanding our common humanity and the common right to equality and dignity that we all share. That is the opposite of hate. It's also, by the way, the core of the antidote to hate.
I love that. I was just
thinking. Thank
you. I kind of went out there with you for a second. I went silent. Repairing your humanity. That's the other part of the title. Oy. You're right. That's tough stuff when we have to talk about repairing humanity. How far out are we on the spectrum of having lost it as humanity? Really scary times, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. I go back and forth on that. I mean, on the one hand, I honestly don't think this is the most hateful moment we've ever experienced, even as a country. I mean, if you just, if we're being honest and we look at the history of the United States of America, it is a history in so many ways forged in hate. In spite of our ideals and aspirations to the contrary, we're a country that was in so many ways founded by, through, and continues to perpetuate inequality, injustice, and hate. So I don't necessarily think it's the worst it's ever been. I still think it's bad enough that we have to do something about it. And by the way, I'm not quite sure it's going to get better before it might not get worse before it gets better, but I'm optimistic in our capacity to grow and change and improve. I believe in our ability not just to be cruel, but to be kind, to not just feed hate with more hate, injustice with more injustice, cruelty with more cruelty, but to respond with our better angels, our better selves. I've seen people change in my lifetime, become less hateful. I tell in the book stories of ex-neo-Nazis and former terrorists and people who have left some of the most extreme kinds of hate behind. So I know it's possible. And I think part of what has to happen is that we have to understand, deeply understand, that the moment we're in, that the conditions we're in, it's not inevitable. That this kind of hate and otherizing and inequality and injustice is unnatural, and that we can fix it.
Well, two things. Somebody said to me the other day, and I thought it was good thinking. It's not that Trump is so different than anybody else. It's just the veil is off. And because we have social media and we have so much, we're information age, wherever you turn, you can get info, whether it's right, wrong, indifferent. the veil is off.
Sure.
It's all out there. And that may be what's fueling this. And the danger of that is that maybe that is something we don't know how to overcome. Because before, things trickled from the top down, and now they're kind of trickling from the bottom up. And we're just, some of it's just not being edited properly, if you will. I think that's a conversation that's worth having at some point in this whole thing. You talked about the fringes, the extreme. Is that where hate lives, or is hate found everywhere? That's a question I think needs answering.
Well, listen, I think, I draw a very broad definition in my book because I think we need to solve hate in all ways at all levels. It doesn't mean they're all the same. It doesn't mean that being a bully in elementary school or, writing nasty things to people on social media is the same thing as being a terrorist or a neo-Nazi participating in genocide. They're obviously not the same thing. At the same time, they have the same root. We know that. We know that the communities, for instance, most likely to be victims of hate crimes are also the communities most likely to have a disproportionate percentage of, trolling nasty comments online, directed at them online. So that suggests to us that wherever the sort of acts of hate fall on the spectrum, that core mentality, that history in the past and the habits of the present of demeaning and dehumanizing certain people, especially certain groups of people, because of their identity and their ideas, we know that that's played out in very similar ways across that spectrum. Same way, I don't think that explicit, overt bigotry and unconscious bias are the same thing. Of course they're not the same thing. Again, though, the communities that tend to be, or the identities that tend to be the targets of overt, explicit bigotry are the same that we tend to have biases against unconsciously. So it's recognizing that hate exists in a spectrum, and what we tend to do, especially in this moment right now of hyper-partisanship, is we tend to be always pointing our finger and blaming someone else, that they do it worse, or they did it first, or they did it first and worse. And that may very well be true. I don't find that to be terribly constructive, because what it ends up happening is that none of us take responsibility for our own part, our own piece of the puzzle, and how we can, in our own lives, in our own work, in our own workplaces, in our communities, our governments, how we can fight hate. And I think we all need to take responsibility for it.
I think in the book, that's probably the most powerful part of the whole book, because it's always them. You and I spend a lot of time on Twitter. It's always the other guy, right? It isn't. It's you. Yeah. It's us. It's we. It's me. Start here and see how you can bridge that gap. We'll get to that in a minute. But I want to go into, you brought up this young Palestinian as one of the people that you met. Bassam Araman, is that how he says his name?
Bassam Araman, yes.
Yeah. Oh, my God, what a story. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, I mean, to me, this is, again, why in trying to understand the phenomenon of hate, it helped me to look at places where we think hate is the most unavoidable, the most hopeless. In the actual study of geopolitical places like Israel-Palestine, scholars call it intractable. They call them intractable conflicts. They believe they cannot be solved, or people believe they cannot be solved. And so to go to the West Bank and to meet Bassam, who, when he was a teenager, was accused of terrorism. I mean, he uses the word terrorism. He was convicted of terrorism. He was actually convicted for an incident that he wasn't physically present for. Some friends of his threw some grenades, and he wasn't there. He was involved in sort of the planning. He wasn't there. The grenades ended up, they were thrown at an Israeli military convoy, but they didn't hit the target. No one was hurt, but still he and his friends were all arrested and eventually convicted of terrorism and sent to prison for several years. And so during Bassam's sentence, he was shown a film about the Holocaust. And by his own telling, he went to go see the film because he wanted to see Jews being killed. Thought he would enjoy it. But when he saw the film, it changed his whole life. It broke him wide open. He saw the suffering. He experienced the humanity, the pain, the it changed him as a person. And after prison, he ended up getting a master's degree in Holocaust studies, and he started an organization of former Palestinian combatants and former Israeli combatants working together for peace and understanding and common humanity, and to experience the world through each other's eyes. And again, that he can go, that people are capable, even in those places, even in those dynamics, of that kind of transformation, to me just reminds us all of what's possible.
There's another story that's also quite compelling. It's the story of Arno Mikolas, a former neo-Nazi.
Like Alice, yes.
Oh, my God. That's another one. I mean, you came up with these unbelievable... Oh, my God. I don't know how you found these people along the way. But what does that say about how we come to hate and how we give up hating? Tell his story just briefly, because I want people to understand that there are these terrific pieces in here in this wonderful book of yours. She's not just preaching to the choir. She's been in the field and she's met the people who we all can learn something from. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Arno's story, I'll also let people discover the details of it in the book, but what is profound is we tend to think, certainly before I started this, I thought, okay, people who become neo-Nazis must be, extremely aberrant in some way. They must be predisposed in ideologically, temperamentally, somehow to being hateful, antagonistic, overt racists. And what was so stunning both about Arno's story of how he became what in his heyday was the top white power recruiter in North America, and also lead singer of a very influential neo-Nazi band. But there was nothing in his childhood, in his background, in his history, in his family, anything that made him stand out, per se, that made you think, oh, this is what he's going to grow up to be. Rather, and it's true of his story, but it's also true of the research into neo-Nazi groups and terrorist groups and violent right-wing extremist groups, that, in fact, most people, by and large, who join these organizations don't join because they have this extremist ideology, but rather because they are looking for belonging, and through, unfortunate happenstance, find it in these organizations. And then the term the researchers use is that they slide into the beliefs, that they deepen their beliefs, and their convictions. They firm up those convictions as a form of bonding, basically bonding over hate. And, that seemed completely nonsensical and horrible and alien to me until, of course, you realize that the core of that ideology, again, not saying it's the same, but that core of that ideology is of white supremacy. It has always been part of the United States of America, and like the air we breathe, is something that we all breathe in. And once you recognize that, then the other part of it is look, if it seems so strange to bond over hate, right? What I realized is I was doing it all the time. And let's go back to Fox News, bonding over thinking about how hateful those people and those, are. That's the same kind of thing, too. It's also bonding over hate. We all do it. And again, it's not saying that it's all the same, it's all equally bad, but taking some responsibility for our piece of it, as opposed to always just pointing fingers.
You are listening to The Halli Casser-Jayne Show. My guest today is progressive activist and author of The Opposite of Hate, Sally Kohn. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern at hallicasserjayne.com, and is always available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to find me on Spotify and on your Alexa device, too. I think it's very powerful because, I think a lot of the world is fueled by that kind of, I can join you if we can bond on. Like, it's like in school, like girls. Remember in grammar school and junior high, you'd pick on the other girl. It'd be a bunch of girls saying, that's a bad person. We'll be friends because all three of us hate her. That's such, it's so human, and it's so stupid, and it's so wrong, and it's, how do we get there? How do we change that? I mean, it's just, this is something funny about you. You confronted some of your Twitter trolls. You do it all the time, actually. You watch your Twitter. I mean, you're courageous that way. What when you come up against people who are giving you a hard time, there's some controversy in the book with Amato Sue, and you work that out with her. How is that? Because you were able to do that because of what you learned in the coming to the writing of the background and then the research and then putting the book together. What did you learn from that we can learn from you?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. By the way, I'm not sure that's been resolved to her satisfaction, but I've
nice of you to say.
Tried to I've tried to clarify the facts and apologize for what I needed to apologize for, and for certainly my blind spots and mistakes, and the fact that I can and need to continue to learn and grow and do better. I will say that, it's an interesting question about, the first thing I learned about talking to some of my Twitter trolls, and I mean, I perhaps everybody gets trolled online, because of my background, my time at Fox, especially because of being gay, because of being Jewish, I get a fair amount of strong trolling, and it was interesting to me to call up people who, they're saying things I can't say on the radio, right? But to call them up and realize that they were just people, that they were complicated and messy and had likes and dislikes and fears and concerns and pain and suffering and quirks and just were people, complicated like the rest of us. And we often treat the other, whoever the other is in our mind and our worldview, we treat them as stereotypes. We reduce them to their worst acts or their worst deeds. We, treat them as inhuman. We don't even call them people. We call them trolls. Trolls aren't people. They're creatures who live under a bridge. And so to experience their humanity was really eye-opening for me in a direct way. And again, also, it goes back to that they started at philosophy of hate, which, I asked them. I didn't even ask them if they hated me. I figured that was a given. So I asked them, why do you hate me? And they pretty much to a one responded, I don't hate you. But they thought I was hateful. They thought my actions, my deeds, the way I was on air or online, they thought I was hateful. And that, again, I'm not saying I agree with that, but we spend a lot of energy right now, especially politically, trying to persuade others to understand us, and it made me want to spend more and understand the value in trying to in seeking to understand, not just seeking to be understood.
I have to say this, though. The one thing that is clear to me is in this whole political craziness that we're all living right now, at the core of it, I don't know that people are so opposed on policy right now with this particular government that's in power in this country. I think that the argument isn't about policy, because I think nobody discusses policy really that much anymore. I think the argument is over a loss of morality and the ethics that have been taken away from the core of everything that we're about. And I think that if we were to that's we can't get to past that, and we can't seem to resolve that, because at the core of that, at least from one side to the other, is the ideology. But I do think it's a problem that you're writing a book really about ethics in a way, because there's a right and wrong here. There's a good, there's a bad. You know what I'm saying? And yet the thing that we can't seem to resolve in this country right now is just that, about what's right versus wrong, what's ethically and morally correct. I think that's problematic.
Yeah,
what are you going to say? Yeah, talk to me. I'd love to hear. What do you say?
Yeah, I'll say this. So what I'll say about that is, I think there is a right and wrong. I think there is good and bad. But what's important to distinguish between is right and wrong ideas, good and bad acts, versus some people are right, some people are wrong, some people are good, some people are bad. That's where it becomes quite dangerous. I do happen to think that at this moment in history we are over-exacerbating our political differences in the extremes, when in fact there's much more we agree on than don't. And in fact, when you look at issue after issue after issue, the public is broadly united, generally, by the way, in progressive directions. But either way, right? My position isn't like, let's all abandon our deeply held beliefs and our values and right? I think, as I said, I think those differences and disagreements are part of what make us great. What I do think we have to recommit to in this country is finding ways to disagree and debate that are healthy and respectful and constructive and not destructive. And the idea that we should stand up for what we believe in without stomping on others. I believe that's possible. I believe that's necessary. I believe that's moral. I believe it's effective. And that we should move in that direction more and more.
One last thing is all we really have, and I say it somewhat cynically, hope. Sally.
I think hope is an amazing thing, right? Hope is a recognition of a dissatisfaction with the present moment, and I think we should be dissatisfied with the present moment, and yet not give in to a sense that this is all we could ever be, that we can never be better. So I believe in hope. I believe in hope. And I would like us to spread it further.
I've been speaking with Sally Kohn. Her book, The Opposite of Hate, a field guide to repairing our humanity. Find Sally on Twitter, where her handle is Sally Kohn, Kohn spelled Kohn. And now a few words on hope. How the hell did the USA, the land of the free and we used to be brave, turn into the angry, hateful lot that we have? And in case you hadn't noticed, we are a hateful lot. We hate gays, we hate women, we hate men, we hate Jews, we hate blacks, we hate Christians, we hate abortion, we hate Mexicans, we hate Democrats, we hate Republicans, we hate Muslims. We very much hate each other. Of course, none of us thinks we are a hater. It's the other guy who is hateful. In the USA of today, blame is the second pastime to hate as the most common Twitter tweet. Crooked Hillary, it's all the Clintons' fault. Oh, those deplorables, Trump is their fault. Well, maybe Trump is their fault, but Trump is our fault too. And Trump deserves mention in this conversation on hate, for never in my lifetime do I remember so hateful a U.S. president operating under the divide and conquer mentality, defining our nation as an us versus them. But all of this hatred didn't start with Donald Trump. He was just cynical enough to play that which was already there. What is it about a society that fuels itself on hatred? Where did all of this begin? Is hate a product of our politics, or is our politics a product of our hate? Is the divisiveness of our society a result of an educational system gone bad, or a religious community out of touch? The questions are endless, the answers abound. Even back in the dark ages of the 1940s, the Broadway duo of Rodgers and Hammerstein were exploring the genesis of bigotry and hate. They gave us their answer in the song, You've Got to Be Carefully Taught. From 1949, when South Pacific first premiered, to 2018, as much that has changed is as little that has changed. We still hate. Bigotry and hate abound. Tears come to my eyes when I think how the very generation that cried give peace a chance had their chance and seems to have squandered it. Back in the day, the baby boomer generation thought the enemy was the Viet Cong, the Soviets. The danger was beyond our borders. Maybe it was, but it was also very much an internal matter. The real enemy was right here on American soil. It is each of us who hates the other. There is no such thing as my fellow Americans. We the people, it no longer exists. It's us versus them, right versus left, Republican versus Democrat, straight versus gay, Christianity versus Muslim. We are a nation in a crisis. We are a nation at war with each other. We've all been turned into mean girls, boys and girls alike, cruel, snarky, sometimes even bullying, because you can do that on social media, where a friend really isn't a friend, really nothing but a bot of sorts, with a picture. A stranger at the other end of cyberspace becomes a so-called friend because you each share a point of view. Social media has turned into the breeding ground for hate, where a clever, hateful tweet or Facebook post earns a badge of honor, no matter who it hurts or what it destroys. Nothing is real these days, not even the real Donald Trump, as his Twitter handle identifies the President of the United States, who, by the way, is the queen of mean girls, with his branding people as Little Marco, Crooked Hillary, Little Jeffrey, Slippery James Comey, always mean, always derogatory, teaching hate, the hate-filled President Trump, who once made fun of a physically challenged New York Times reporter and enjoys putting down women and Mexicans and anyone who isn't white and to the so-called manor-born. As for me, I can rant and I can rave, but I'm not quite ready to throw in the towel on this country I love just yet. I guess I'm just as corny as Kansas in August, another Rodgers and Hammerstein lyric from South Pacific. Hate-filled as this country is today, there is always tomorrow, and hope that the next generation will do better than the one in charge, because, back to Rodgers and Hammerstein and their song Bali High, also from South Pacific, your own special hopes, your own special dreams, bloom on the hillside and shine in the streams. Let's hope. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of RESEC LLC. Be sure to tune in to Talkish Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, when new podcasts are posted at hallicasserjayne.com and on all your favorite apps. We are open 24/7. So, until next time, when we meet again, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.